To start with, I'd like to chat a little bit about materials. I get asked a lot about the kind of things that I use, and to begin with I'd like to talk about my watercolours. So these are the watercolours that I use. They're Holbein. Now they do come in tubes. You can buy them in lovely boxes like this. That note on the thing says I need raw umber. You don't have to buy them in quite such large quantities, and you can buy the tubes individually. So these are quite small tubes. You can get them in a slightly larger size. There's looking around. There we are, that's the other one. So that's the next size up. They will fill a pan quite comfortably. That will probably fill a half pan and a little bit more. And obviously if you've got a full pan, so half pans are those little square ones and full pans are the rectangular ones. So that will easily fill all of them. They're not too expensive, but obviously if you're going to buy a large set like that, then you're going to start running into quite a few pounds, sort of £80, £90. But to buy individual tubes as you go is probably the best way. So once you've done that, and you bought your tubes, and I buy all of my stuff online at Jackson's, but I'm sure there are other places to purchase from, but I like Jackson's, they're very, very reasonable. Once you've done that, then you have to put them into the pans. Now you can buy these little pans individually and then fit them into a box like this. Not necessarily a very cheap way of going about it, I admit, but you can just put them loosely into something, if I can ever get into this one. Here we go. To something like this. So this has got obviously ready-made pans. Well, there's a good example of how wet they stay. Even though, oh, where's my water? There it is. Even though they have been sat there for months, they still actually remain quite tacky, which is exactly what you want. And that is the beauty of these things, because you can stick them in there and they will stay moist, which is unlike any other watercolour tube. So if you buy, say, Winsor & Newton watercolour tubes or Daler Rowney, and you stick them into a little, thing like this, then they will dry out and they will go hard, and you won't be able to get them active. And that's the point of these things. They're immediately accessible, and it gives you the opportunity to just dive into any colour that you like. If you use tubes, then you do have the potential for that blast of colour, which is wonderful. But unfortunately, when you're trying to work on most things, you often think, oh, I just need a bit of that or a bit of that, and you don't want to have to then sit around, fart around, rummaging around through a whole box of tubes like this, trying to find the one colour that you need. So having them all out like that is great. Now, as you can see, I have more than one palette. This little paint box is my general paint box, and you can see the state of it. This one is my portrait paint box, and the colours here are much limited compared to that. Obviously there are greens and things here which I would never really use in portraiture, but generally I could pick up any one and use them, but that's definitely much more useful. Having said that, it's really heavy. This one is, the Fletcher Watson paint box. Heaven knows where I picked it up, but it is meant for sketching outdoors, and you've got these lovely things to just flick through your finger, your thumb, whatever you like, to hold it. But honestly, I think it's meant for a man rather than a woman, because my arms, when I'm demonstrating portraiture, they're fit to drop before I get halfway through. Also, when you have the paints in the palette, make sure that you do a little card, something like that, to give you some idea of what the hell colour they are, because seriously, some of the darker colours can become almost impossible to identify, and you should do that with any paint box that you've got. It doesn't really matter, and to some extent to your tubes, but it doesn't really matter to the same degree that if you have them in pans. I'm just going to read out the colours on this sheet so that you've got an idea of the colours that I use for portraiture. So there's sepia, perylene maroon, Naples yellow, a permanent rose, alizarin, that's shadow green, cadmium deep, golden ochre, light cadmium light, pyrrole red, lemon yellow, raw umber, raw sienna, Mars violet, burnt umber, light red, phthalo blue, that's green shade, cobalt, ultramarine, Payne's grey, cerulean. Out of these colours, then there are just a few that are absolutely and completely indispensable to me. One of them would be the Perylene Maroon. I cannot do a portrait without that. The other would be raw umber or raw sienna, but you can see the raw umber slightly more golden. It is slightly opaque, so you do have a little problem there, but on the whole, I still like to stick to my raw umber. Mars violet. It's a fantastic colour for making shadows on faces. It's just, I couldn't do without it. You can make your own. If you can't get Mars violet, you can usually make your own by mixing a cerulean, which is kind of a greeny blue, with a cadmium red. Obviously, now you're going into opacity, and as I would talk to you later on about, you know, when you're painting watercolours, the more transparent colours you can use, the better your paintings will be. The less likely you're going to have that sort of muddy, murky look, and the more layers that you can build up. So as a general rule, always try to stick to transparent colours. So that's it. So Perylene Maroon, Mars Violet, raw umber. Those are the three that I use absolutely constantly. Other colours will be added here and there. I do add, I quite like the shadow green to give some depth in shadows, and the sepia. I will occasionally add a little bit of burnt umber. And as for the blues, well, obviously you've got a selection there. Phthalo is a hugely staining colour, so it's a dangerous colour to use unless you really know what you're doing with it. But adding a little bit of gum arabic can help resist and stop the paint from going straight into the paper, so that's not such a bad colour. Ultramarine is usually the blue of choice because out of all of them it's the less staining and it's still pretty transparent. So those are the colours that I use. And that is my paint box, and as you can see, it is a blooming mess. Okay, what else do we need? Well, we have our paints, now we need paint brushes. So these are mine. I use Isabi Kolinsky Sables. As with all things watercolour, not necessarily with acrylic, but certainly with watercolour, you do tend to get what you pay for. And these are, I'd say, middle toward upper range. They're not the most expensive paintbrushes you can buy. If you're going to treat yourself, if you only have a few pennies, then buy a smaller size, because they will last you, if you look after them, a lifetime. And you do have to look after them, and that means not leaving them stuck in the water like that, and always making sure they're well clean at the end of it. And don't use them for acrylics and etc, etc. But let's say look after them, and they will last you a long time. I like this brand particularly for two reasons. It has body. You can see it's got a bit of a give there, but it's really got quite a bit of body. So when you're painting, the brush isn't just flip-flopping all over the place. It's very difficult to paint when brushes are doing that. And also, when it's wet, it comes to a lovely point, which means that even in the very largest size, you could still do fine detail work, and you won't lose any definition. Generally, you don't need a great big pack like this of all these different paintbrushes. Of course you don't. But as far as watercolour are concerned, I tend to stick to round paintbrushes. This is a round. It means the bevel there is round. You have flats as well. I just have one, which I might use very, very occasionally and rarely. And you have filberts. Now, I love filberts for acrylic work, but not for watercolour. I have strange little paintbrushes here, like that's a makeup brush. I have also these funny little things. Now, these are Woolly's Wonder Brush, and they're really nice for scrubbing out anything that might have gone a little bit wrong. They take out minor mistakes, a couple of washes worth, and you can easily remove it. If you've got really deep-seated paint on it, you're not going to be able to get rid of it. But, just a little problem area, then just dip them in water, take off the excess, and just scrub it into the paint, and it will lift it off, and it's quite useful. I do use them quite a lot. I didn't used to, but just recently I started using more and more. Maybe I'm just getting worse at painting. Oh, and as far as sizes go, when people say, oh, what brushes do I absolutely need? Well, absolutely, you need a wash brush. Sorry, I should say. So you really do need a wash brush. Even a cheap one will do. These are quite good. This is another Isabi, but it's squirrel. So they're quite useful for washing, but something along the size of a 12 to 14. But as I say, you can get cheaper ones to begin with because they're blooming expensive if you buy the Konietzki Sable. Then you need a sort of a medium range paintbrush, which I would say which is about a 5. And then you probably need something smaller, maybe a 2 or a 1, just for those very fine details. That's a 1, so it's really getting onto the smaller size, but still useful to have. Okay, so that 3 brushes, large, medium, small, that will do you. Okay, and a brush roll, very, very good idea. Will stop them from ending up at the bottom of a bag and curving. What else do I use? Right, I use gouache. This is designer's gouache, which is quite a good brand in Winsor & Newton. It's permanent white, so that's their equivalent of titanium white. Really nice one to use. And where do I use it? Well, I use it when I've made a small and tiny mistake, and then literally it's just dipping the point of the paintbrush in and just dotting that correction. So for example, if you're painting a portrait and you want to get that little sparkle of white just at the base of the pupil, and you've left it, but now unfortunately a wash has covered it and you've lost it, you want to get it back, then a little dot of that will be fine. If you use large areas of this, then you're entering into gouache, and it's a completely different system and it will look wrong. So don't start thinking I can correct a large area using gouache. It won't work. The titanium white is a good one. They also do a zinc white. Sorry, it's called permanent white, but it is titanium. They also do a zinc white, which is more transparent, so could be useful on sort of a little slightly larger area, say the white of the eye, which has gone a little bit too dark. You might want to put that right. A wash of the zinc would probably just about correct that without looking as though you've added a different medium to the page. So that's what I use for sort of minor errors. This, my little Sherlock Holmes glass, obviously it's a shot glass. This is really useful to me because when you're painting, you often have the bowl of water, there's my water pot, and that's normally over to the side, and you're painting over to the side and you're reaching over, etc, etc. But when I'm working on a small area where I don't want to keep diving over to get water, then this is much more useful. I have it right next to me and I just dip in and paint the area and dip in and paint the area. So little glass like that, a little pot, doesn't matter, anything small which you can have near you can be really useful. This is, what do they call them? Magic sponges, I think. It's a funny thing, as you can see. It's very firm fibre, and you can split it and break it up. Now, very, very dense. Now, you can buy them for the floor, usually from places like the pound shop, for next to nothing, and they're the same thing. Or you could spend £4 on an individual sponge from an art shop, which would be stupid, wouldn't it? So go and find the cheap ones from somewhere. Now, these are really, really very useful. These are for larger areas where you've gone horribly wrong, and I promise you they'll remove 90% of the paint. Regardless of how many layers you put in, they will take it off. You put them into the water, squidge out the excess, and then just sweep across your artwork. But bear in mind that once you've done that, you're taking away the surface of your paper. So you might need to then think, what can I do to protect it when you go in with your paints? Because if you have removed most of the surface, if you've been pretty harsh with this, then you could end up with a case of blotting paper and your paints go straight in. It all looks rather horrible. So the gum arabic, that comes in very useful at that point. So I mentioned gum arabic before to add to staining colours, just a little drop with the paint as you mix it in. So again, if you have removed a very large area, you're a little bit nervous now about going back in with your watercolours, then again, a couple of drops of gum arabic will sort of become the size. They will prevent the paper acting like blotting paper and protect it a little bit. Right, other little things that I use, covered in cat fur. That's not obligatory, yeah. You don't need cat fur with everything. This is just a natural sponge, but really useful, again, for not necessarily removing things, but adding texture and things like that. I like those. And then the credit card. This is a credit card cut into 4. And once you do that, old credit card, don't use your most recent one, you've got a nice curvy edge there, and you've got a really, really sharp edge here. Now, these are brilliant for digging out texture. It's something you have to practice if you're going to have a go at doing this. But if I drag over a picture and show you one I did earlier. So here we have, I think you could just about see it, yeah. So I'll give you a bit more. Oh, there he is, handsome man. What I did here, on the hair, to get the texture, you paint over. Now you can do it sort of straight onto, paint onto sort of white paper, as it were, and scrape in, but then you're going to get the white of the paper coming up. So because I didn't want white of the paper, I did multiple washes, and then I went in really, really dark, and you leave it until the paint has almost dried. Not quite, but almost dried. You can see it'll become just about matte, not quite. It goes from satin to matte, so gloss to satin to matte. When it's almost at matte, then it's ready. And then you get your thingamajig here, and you scrape using the curvy bit there, and you just scrape out the paint. And obviously, if you're using something like this, you want to go into the texture or the direction of the hair, and it will remove it, and it will remove it to the last layer of paint, which is that one. So it's a really, really, oh goodness me, I'm digging out his head now. It's a really, really useful way of doing it. If you go in too early while the paint is still wet, what will happen is you'll get the exact opposite of the pale lines coming through. You get really dark lines. And if you use the very sharp edge, you'll automatically get dark lines, because you're scraping the surface of the paper, and then the paint will just go straight into it. And become dark. So it's a great technique, really, really useful. I'm going to sort of turn him around a little bit so you can see more clearly, and you can see where I've used it just on the side of his head here. Okay, so that is the talk on my materials as far as watercolour goes. And if you have any queries or anything, just put something in the comments below, and I will be happy to answer and reply as quickly as I possibly can. Thank you for listening. Bye.